Hello and welcome back to Life Redesigned. For those of you new here, I am Bob.
I'm Karri.
And we sold everything that we owned a couple of years ago, and we hit the road full-time in our RV right there, right next to us. Today's topic is going to be something a little more somber than what we normally cover, and something we've dealt with now twice in our 2 years of full-time travel, and that is, Karri, what happens when you die while RVing? Hello redesigners, and welcome back to the channel. This is a video that Karri and I have actually contemplated making for quite a while, as we wanted to make sure that we use the proper terminology and use the proper respect that this topic deserves. This is more of a PSA or something to get everybody within the community to think about, because there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes with this very topic. Safe to say that.
Yes.
Okay, now Karri and I have been subject to a couple of times in our full-time travels where somebody has passed away due to various circumstances, and it always ends up, because of Karri's background running funeral homes, that I always end up with a whole bunch of what we call amateur questions that probably every kid would ask, and they're the questions that I ask because I'm not good with this subject as Karri is. So I've written down a few of the questions, and we're also going to cover not only the things that probably everybody's wondering, because people do have a curious mind, but there's also going to be some tips and some things that you can avoid having a major issue should this situation arise to you. Things that you can not only expect, but things that you can do to circumvent a lot of the problems that arise when this happens. Is that a fair enough assessment?
That's fair.
All right, so I'm going to grab the book of knowledge because I wrote my questions down, and we're going to go over these. Now, Karri's background aside, as with every topic that we cover, we always recommend that you do your own research, because laws change on the daily. What's right in one state may be wrong in another. What may be okay in every state may be wrong federally. Always do your research. Always have an alternate opinion, because again, we are just YouTubers no matter what our background is. Okay, we're going to start with the first question. Is Karri, immediately, once somebody is found not alive in an RV, what happens?
So we're going to assume this is a couple, and what will usually happen is somebody will dial 911. So the fire, police, EMS will arrive. Now, depending on how and when the death actually occurred, it's going to be called an untimely. And so because EMS cannot say exact time of the deceased, they will call in a medical examiner. They will take that said person to the hospital, and they will do what they need to do at the hospital. So
as we have seen on both occasions, this was treated as a crime scene until somebody knew otherwise. With a couple, 9 times out of 10, you have a witness right there.
Right.
So you have something that will probably expedite that process, because we've seen on one time it was a very long process, and a second time it was a very quick process. Mm-hmm. So is that safe to say that that can vary based on witnesses and stuff of that nature?
Yes, and how that person is feeling. If they're obviously overwhelmed and they can't speak, then they will look to the medical examiner to be that voice for that person.
Now, that aside, the first time we ran into this was a husband and wife couple who had been traveling for about 30 years. So that basically fit that. The second one becomes in this newest one for us was something that was kind of uncharted territory, because we hadn't really thought about this, because we do travel as a couple. And that is, if you're traveling alone, how does that change and what happens at that point?
So if you're traveling alone, you have to, the park people could come knock on your door. If they hear a TV going and they hear no sound inside, and they're not comfortable entering your RV, they will call the authorities. And again, the police will come. They'll do a welfare check. Yeah. They'll open the door. And if they find, yes, this person is in fact deceased, then they will call in EMS, not so much fire at that point, but again, a medical examiner to determine the cause and time of death.
And that's where this really becomes a longer process, because
yeah.
it is definitely at that point a crime scene, unless there's something that is blatantly obvious right out in the open. And even then, they have to do their due
They
diligence.
do. It all depends on, I mean, blood pools. There's a lot that goes into it.
So now this is something that once you get past all of this and the ME has done their job and everything else, I think it's probably the number one question that everybody asks and everybody thinks of, and especially as I just stand by whenever this happens and Karri is in the position where she can assist, she will. I normally stand back with all the other people just watching, because I don't know what to do. I've never been good with this. But the first question that always happens is, what happens with that body and how does it get home? And that's something that when Karri explained this to me, I was actually kind of surprised by. And I'll let you cover this.
Again, it depends on if you're a couple or if you're alone. So if you're a couple, chances are you would have to, depending on what state you're in, you need to find a local funeral home. And then you would need to be in contact with your funeral home in the state in which you live. And they will have to decide on transport. Sometimes they fly the deceased back home. Other times, depending on how close you are with your funeral home, they will make the trek down to wherever you are, pick up the body, and bring it home.
It brings up another good point too, is now if you are, you have a situation where a spouse can speak up for you, or someone traveling with you to get you to your home, that's great. What if you have no home to go back to? And case in point, and Karri and I sold our home and we are full-time on the road. What happens at that particular point?
Well, whichever state your license says that you reside in is the state that you would go back to.
So for us domiciling in Florida, our
Yes.
bodies would be sent back to Florida,
Yeah.
and then whatever the county apparently handles it at that point, if
Yep.
there's nobody to claim.
Yep.
All right, that's going to bring up another question too that I had, which is whether it goes home, and maybe you can cover both of these for me, whether it goes to a home state funeral home
Yep.
or it goes to the county of your residence. Who
Okay.
covers the costs of transporting that body?
Well, so if you're by yourself and you truly have no next of kin, so what would happen is actually you would stay at the hospital morgue until they could find a next of kin. If they couldn't find a next of kin, they would take it to court, like you would kind of do a probate, and you would be a ward of the state.
And then from there, the state would cover those costs.
It's typically a simple cremation. You have a name. They would keep you for, I believe, it used to be 7 years, to keep trying to find, somebody in your family. And if not, they do bury it.
Interesting.
Now for a couple, if you go to your home funeral home, then all of your wishes hopefully would be taken care of by your next of kin.
We say hopefully because we have a story for you towards the end of this video.
Yeah.
One of the things that with this stuff, these are just blanket questions that I think
Yeah.
everybody just has general curiosity on. But really what's the most important thing here in this video is going to be some kind of tips that you can do as a traveler to kind of mitigate some of the issues that, well, families and stuff leave behind. If you have questions that are above the 5 that I asked, we ask you just leave them simply in the comments. Karri will answer each one as much as she can. And again, remember that we are just YouTubers. We are just average people who have a background in this sort of thing, or at least she does. And we can answer your questions to the best of her ability. We still recommend that you look towards maybe legal counsel for questions that get really involved, because again, as we mentioned in the beginning, things can change dramatically from the time that this video comes out to the time that you watch it. Okay, now before we go into anything else, I want to cover a few tips that Karri and I have come up with that can actually help you and your family mitigate a lot of the nonsense that will happen once you're found, especially if you're traveling solo, and that's what this really is going to cover.
Yeah.
And I know ultimately this is YouTube, and someone's going to go, I don't care because I'll be dead and it won't matter.
But somebody may care, and you're leaving them with a mess.
I think until somebody goes through this, you don't realize how much of a burden you're creating for people to have to take care of things when you're not there.
And it gets tricky.
Number one is always register with your real name. Now, Karri and I have seen this countless occasions where somebody has registered under the name of John Doe at a public campground that's unmanned, and you just put in your $20 and you camp for the day. Most bodies are actually found when people stay past their checkout time. And Karri has said numerous times that if you register with a John Doe name, you most likely are going to be treated just like that. When you're found, you're going to be treated like a John Doe until they can find something that identifies you. Always check in with your full name. The other part is too, is Karri and I came up with this thing here. We have a safe in our rig, is basically have a safe somewhere in your rig or your vehicle that has documents that says, one, not only who you are, but two, if something should happen to you, what they should do to either find your family or what your wishes are. Because let me tell you something, nobody's going to guess. They're going to do whatever the cheapest is or whatever that state allows. If some states allow for a burial, they're going to cover that. Others are probably going to do a cremation. If you don't believe in that, well, it's too late because you didn't do due diligence. Three is a good thing to do is most phones, whether iPhone or Android, have an emergency contact that EMS or somebody can access without your passcode. An emergency contact, update that information to your next of kin or somebody that can speak on your behalf and say, yes, these people have a setup situation. Number four is always let someone know your location, plain and simple. We use Life 360 with our kids. They always know where we are, even if we don't get a chance to tell them, hey, we're going to be down the road from you. They'll know because they can open that app. If they haven't heard from mom and dad in a couple of days, they know to check that app and see where we are because, well, that's where we are. All right, and the last part here is very important. That is to consider having a PreNeed, well, I guess contract set up with your funeral home, as that will make sure that your wishes are followed through with. This will alleviate a lot of family bickering, a lot of issues, and a lot of, well, just frivolous lawsuits across the board with families. And believe me, this does happen. And I can speak from experience on this. As Karri and I were traveling a few years ago to Disney World with our children, and during that time on the way down, my father had died. And didn't have any of this set up and went through a very similar situation. I was not reachable due to numerous circumstances, and somebody else made all the decisions for him. And that is still something that I wrestle with quite often, as his needs were not met, but they were also not explained to anybody. So always have some kind of PreNeed set up so that you know things are going to be covered, and it makes a world of difference for the people that you leave behind.
It certainly does.
Now, we hope that this video, one, starts a conversation. This was never intended to be a one-all or to cover every scenario. It was to bring attention that this does happen on the road, and especially when you're full-timing and you've given up everything, that the road becomes your home. Having this out there as a discussion is something I think is great for the community and something that probably, in all fairness, should be discussed more. Now, on a personal note, Karri, I want to thank you for even just listening to all my questions, because this goes on behind the scenes more often than you realize, because I lean on her for a lot of this stuff, and Karri is phenomenal when it comes to this. It's probably why she did so well in that field for so long. If you have questions, again, leave them in the comments below. Karri will answer as much as it can.
Absolutely.
And we'll do our best, as we always do, to provide you with the truth and the honest nature of what life on the road is really like. Until next time, I am Bob.
I'm Karri.
And this has been Life Redesigned.